Hi, and welcome back to our Sustainable Futures Career Conversations podcast. In the latest of our episodes, I'm here with Dax Lovegrove. Dax, do you just want to introduce yourself?
I'm Dax Lovegrove. I've been working in sustainability for just over 20 years, and I've been working in the non-profit sector as well as the private sector.
Fantastic. What I want to do is just start with the sort of early career, that starting point into sustainability, where your sort of entry point into this world was. So just talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, I did, first of all, 10 years in sales and marketing and consultancy. And I was in the internet boom, consulting on internet solutions. And then I thought I wanted to do something a bit more meaningful. And I returned to university at the age of 30 to do a master's in sustainable development, which was a bit of a shock to the system to go back to all the textbooks and all the dissertations and that sort of thing. And it was quite a socially orientated degree. A lot about the IMF, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, a lot about development issues in the North and the South. And then I actually wrote to all the big NGOs, the development ones as well as the environmental ones. And then I got a job at WWF.
Okay. Was there a particular prompt for that? Or was it just a general sense of you wanted a more meaningful way of taking your talents and taking your career?
I think, like a lot of us, you want a sense of purpose. And I really enjoyed going back to university, and there were lots of people from various countries in Africa on the course, and it just wakes you up and you think, trade and business has got to be fairer, and we've got to think about climate change and all the rest of it. And I just wanted a sense of purpose. And actually back then I didn't worry too much about which NGO, but I wrote to the big ones, and landed at WWF.
Yeah. And that role was sort of using some of the skills you'd had before. It was that classic transitional role through into a more sustainability defined role. It was using the skills you developed into a more meaningful environment.
Yeah. I think if you've done a bit of sales and marketing, you've done some graft, you've been around the block, you've built up your confidence, you've been in business, and then to go and work in a big NGO, which is a very different kind of world. It's a great thing to have done a bit of business background and then to go into an NGO. And I recommend doing both if you can. Go work in business, but also work in a big NGO, because it just gives you such a different perspective. And you sometimes, if you just work in business, you can be a bit business or industry centric. Mm-hmm. You sort of don't have a full view of the world. And an NGO is such good training, because it just teaches you so much about different perspectives.
You have to do things differently, don't you? And it's a different way of appealing to an audience, and that presumably is where those skills come from.
Yeah. NGOs are, they're big organisations. They can be quite dysfunctional. They can be quite disorganised. There's lots of passionate people. There's lots of experts, and there's lots of strong-minded people there. And the phrase we always had at WWF, in big international group, is it's like herding cats. Yes. Because you're all trying to work in the same direction, but you're also balancing 100 different issues. Yes. And it's a complicated world out there. So, but it was fantastic. Yes. You meet climate policy wonks, you meet foresters and marine biologists and people who've been to the Arctic, the Antarctic, and freshwater experts. And you're trying to piece all these fantastic experts and all the issues together and take it to business. And we know every company is also juggling commercial realities as well as all these sustainability issues. So it was a great grounding.
And that was your role, wasn't it? It was sort of relating what WWF were doing to the business environment at a time when people were just starting to engage with it.
That's right. It was the early days of corporate social responsibility, which was essentially doing a bit of nice things here and there. Yes. without much science to it, without much context. And we back then were trying to put sustainability on the map to say, look, think about the science, think about the context. And yes, herding cats, bringing all these incredible issues to multinational companies to say, look, you need to think about your water footprint, your carbon footprint, your chemicals, your energy use, and you need to have deforestation-free supply chains. How do you start to work on that? Trying to piece all these different issues together and then bring it into the boardrooms. And the trouble is, as you know, a chief exec will always say, well, just give me the top 3 things I need to focus on. Yeah. And that was the hard part, to boil this complexity down to something that a chief exec or a boardroom could respond to.
Yes. Particularly at that time, that the whole nature agenda was still relatively low key. It hadn't been quite appreciated, the importance of the natural environment on the wider economy. Is that fair, or was it further ahead than it seemed from the outside?
Well, carbon, as we all know, sort of became front and center, and so companies were at least starting to understand climate change. They were starting to understand what was their carbon footprint and what did they need to do about it. Nature was coming up the ranks, and there was Pavan Sukhdev and all kinds of other fantastic people. And back then it was TEEB, it was the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity. And, Pavan Sukhdev would talk about, you would rip out the mangroves and put in a shrimp farm. But the economics didn't make sense because the mangroves protected communities from coastal erosions and storms and other things, and the shrimp farm actually made no business sense at the end of it because the economics weren't as valued. You had so much more ecosystems value from a mangrove. So nature was coming up, and then everyone was talking about forestry, and we all talked about Borneo and the Amazon as these biodiverse, rich and very sensitive regions. And WWF was talking about, soft commodities and priority regions around the world, and these, soy and palm oil affecting these regions. So nature was being discussed. It was just that companies didn't really know how to respond. Yes. And we're still working on it today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you spent about a decade there, and then made the move into the fashion industry and
Well, actually, I returned to business, but actually, no, I went to Kingfisher.
Of course you did, yes.
So this is Screwfix and B&Q and Castorama and Brico Depot. It's sort of the home depot of Europe, and Ian Cheshire was the boss. He was one of those fantastic and rare leaders who could talk business, but also could talk sustainability. You had Paul Polman, Ian Cheshire, and a few others who could talk business and sustainability hand in hand, and he was just a real inspiration. And Kingfisher was one of the early movers in sustainability, and also they were talking about being net positive. Yes. So I was championing that movement as well, because sustainability is about damage control essentially. But back then there was a net positive movement to say actually companies can go further, and they can think about how to be net positive on the environment, putting back more into the natural world than they take out, and that was the concept. And how do you apply that ethos in a very practical way and be a net positive business, a net positive champion, which Ian Cheshire certainly was. So we were trying to drive that further forward within Kingfisher. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that sort of made use of that. There's a lot of natural environment, so the wood products and the Forestry Stewardship Council, and so there's sort of a connection there with what you'd done with WWF, presumably.
Yeah, that's right. Ian Cheshire and the Kingfisher team used to say that there's so much timber that goes into home improvement that every year they were using timber the equivalent of a forest the size of Switzerland. It's crazy. So then to be forest positive when it takes weeks or days to cut down a forest, how then do you restore that forest when it can take decades to regrow? We were trying to square that in a very practical way. We knew the concept, we knew the goal, we knew the vision, but how to put that into the business and make it a business model as well was challenging. So having deforestation-free supply chains, sourcing timber in a responsible way, according to the FSC and other responsible certification schemes, and then to how to be forest positive and reforest wherever you can was the challenge. It was the opportunity.
Yes. And that's the transition from NGO not-for-profit into very profit, or whatever the sort of positive intentions there. It's still a very profit-driven organisation. How was that for you? Did you feel you had to develop a different set of skills, or was it another evolution?
You have to make it much more practical. You have to fit with the business goals. So you're sort of readjusting to that. I mean, a lot of my colleagues from WWF, it's like an academy.
Yes.
I mean, so many, and you will know them well, but so many of them go into business. People went into banking and retail and fashion and all sorts. So you sort of still bump into a lot of great colleagues who are now in the private sector. So the difference is, you have to apply environmentalism and also, having a fair supply chain. How do you look at supporting people, workers in the supply chain? And you have to do it in a way that fits with the business. Yes. And nowadays we talk about materiality assessments, which enables companies to think about the 100 issues out there in sustainability, social and environmental, and how to pick out the ones that are most relevant to their particular business, and how to just, try and get some sense of prioritization,
And that sort of brings me to that move to the fashion industry, where that social side of it is a really crucial element of the sustainability agenda. Yeah. Just talk a little bit about that move and whether it was a conscious one or a sort of serendipitous move.
It was a little bit of destiny. I mean, I moved to Swarovski, which is all about crystal making. Yes. in Austria, and it's the most magical village in Austria, where you go to Wattens in Austria, which is on the doorstep of the Alps, and you see this village that is very connected with crystal making, and it's a stunning place to go and see, and then yes, the social side kicks in, because also some of the jewelry making, the finished products, are in Asia. So there are facilities also as crystal making in Austria, but they had facilities in Vietnam and Thailand. So then, how are people being treated in those facilities, as well as the external supply chain? The big push was on making it as responsible as it could be, and I've always carried that in any organisation I've been in, is to say, we've got to manage the environmental footprint, go net positive at every opportunity, but on the social side, how do you sort of define fairness in the supply chain? How do you give people in the supply chain a fair deal? What does that even look like? It's living wages, it's well-being in the factories and around the factories in the communities, and it's complicated. But yes. I've always championed that side of things as well.
And this is a time when transparency is growing all the time, and therefore consumer engagement and the customer is pressing quite hard. And I would imagine that there's an interesting impetus there in terms of what people are looking for. How do you manage that sort of communication element of that process?
Yeah, customers are much more demanding, aren't they, these days? The conscious customer is on the rise. They are much more aware of sustainability issues. They want to feel good about buying the product. And if they've got these suspicions that this product has been made in a very unfair way, or people have been badly treated, or there's forced labour somewhere, or they're not being paid a fair wage, increasingly customers are starting to reject those kinds of products. So therefore, they do demand more transparency, and the job of a sustainability team and a chief sustainability officer is trying to make sure that the commitments are there, the practices are there, that they are getting a fair deal. And then how do you communicate that in a transparent way to the customer to say, look, feel good. Yes. We make these things in a responsible way. Yes. We are managing the environmental issues. We are attempting to go net positive over the next decade. We are treating people well. So you've got to balance all those issues and get the right commitments in place fundamentally, and then work on the communications.
And in terms of the skills that you as a sustainability leader need to deliver that, where would you see the balance between that technical understanding, the clarity of purpose, and the communication side of it?
Yeah, you're trying to balance all those issues, and you try and assemble a team around you who have the technical expertise. And I think where I've been working, we had teams where you had very good teams on the supply chain working on the code of conduct audits, and they'd look at tier 1 suppliers and then your tier 2s and tier 3, subcontractors and so on, and they'd understand the product risks, the product category risks of high risks, the regions from where your sourcing was particularly high risk, and you had very good experts who would then put together an audit program, and you would oversee that and challenge it and make sure that they were going far enough. And again, on the environmental side, equally, you would sometimes bring in expertise to do the carbon number crunching, to do the carbon footprint assessment. And then from having done that assessment, knowing how to manage the footprint and how you would engage the supply chain to bring down the carbon emissions and all the other environmental impacts that you had to manage. So you would make sure the program was prioritizing in the right way, having a good rounded program, and then you'd have your experts to make sure that things were being done in the right way.
I think that's a theme that comes out with a lot of these conversations, is that sense of you as an individual have got a certain set of skills, and then building that team around you that support that, not just with sustainability people, but with the operational expertise in that business.
Yeah, exactly. And where I worked recently was Capri Holdings, and that was Jimmy Choo and Versace. And in both Jimmy Choo and Versace, we did have great teams. And a lot of it is about the procurement, because that's often where the big sort of issues and challenges are. And so you work with your operations team and your procurement teams and your buying teams who have got all kinds of expertise in sourcing materials and finished products. And they would be often the very big sort of teams you'd work with to say, how do we go further in sourcing responsibly and making sure people are being treated well and so on. And so you'd blend your sustainability expertise with their fundamental commercial expertise, and that combination took you further forward.
Yes. Because you've got some really big reputational risks there. These are big brands. These are big brands with reputations to preserve. And presumably your role is a lot around understanding where those risks are, as well as the opportunities that sustainability produces.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, brands are fragile, aren't they? You know, you can put one step wrong and that can damage you for a long time.
Yes.
And so I think when you're putting into the boardroom, look, there are some key risks here we really need to get on top of. The board listens, and you go deeper into your supply chain audits and making sure there's no labour abuses. But you're also trying to say, look, we want to go beyond basic labour protections. We want to go into living wages and well-being, and that's a harder thing to get into. And likewise, you're trying to get into the circular economy. You know, you're not just sort of thinking you're not just eliminating or managing waste. And product waste and so on at the end of the life when consumers have had enough of using them. You're trying to get deep into the circular economy and design out waste from the outset when you can. So it was about reputation management. It was also about supply chain security. It was about complying with regulations. It was about responding to consumers and influencers. I mean, influencers are so influential these days that they can call you out if you're a business that's not covering all its bases. And so you want to say to the customer and the influencers and social media and social commerce to say, look, we are covering our bases. We are taking action. We've got the right commitments in place. We are getting more and more transparent, and we're on top of what we should be doing.
Are there any things that you'd look at in terms of that sort of avoiding that greenwashing accusation, but equally not like hiding your light under a bushel? There's an interesting balance there, isn't there, between those two things? How do you think you've done, or in what ways have you evolved your thinking in terms of how to tread that tightrope?
Yeah, it's a tough tightrope because you've got green hush and you've got green wash, haven't you? And it's tempting to sometimes keep quiet when you know there are weak spots. Yes. And I think what I've tried to do in every organisation I've worked in is to maintain the balance. We've got to be bold. We cannot have green hush. We've got to just work behind the scenes on all the things we should be doing. And I'm always the one that just says, what's the big priorities here? How do we cover the real bases? How do we take real action? And when we spend a bit of time in that space, then we can start communicating, okay, here are our actions right now. Here are our forward-looking commitments. Here are the bases we're trying to cover. And then hopefully I've always tried to strike that balance between being quite bold, but certainly not making claims that are stupid and could be accused of being greenwash. So we make sure at the corporate level you're doing the right things, but also at the product level, if we're communicating something around a product, has that product been made responsibly?
Yes.
And it's, you've
Yes.
got to make a call.
I just want to come back to that circularity piece that you talked about a little bit earlier, because you've been quite vocal about the importance of circularity within particularly the fashion industry. And it seems to me that it's a bit of a sleeping giant in the world of sustainability. The oxygen's taken up by the net zero agenda, where there's circularity is it needs more of a focus. And I'm interested in your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, we're scratching the surface across across most sectors, including fashion. I think we're sort of making strides. I think sometimes businesses get a bit preoccupied with, this is just about recycled and recyclable materials. And it isn't. I always think about the 3 M's. It's materials, it's manufacturing, and it's models, as in business models. So if you use more recycled and recyclable materials and also less blended materials, that fits better with the circular economy. If in manufacturing you're cutting out the waste and reusing offcuts and remanufacturing as much as you can, you're doing stuff in the manufacturing sort of part. And then in business models, if you're offering rental and resale and repair and those kinds of circular services, you're moving into a different kind of business model. And then also on the design side, whether in FMCG or fashion or retail or whatever it is, you can train your design team and your production team to design and produce products in very, very different ways, whether it's modular design or more durability, so they're lasting longer, all those sorts of things. So it's the 3 M's, it's also design. And the fashion industry is moving a little bit more into that space. Other sectors are moving. If you look at Currys and its huge repair centre in Europe, they're making electronics that are a bit more easily repairable and then providing the service to say to customers, this is how you bring back your hardware and we can repair it for you. And so we're moving there, but we need to go a lot further.
Do you think that needs to be driven by regulation, or is it something that will happen through economic advantage?
It's both. There's the extended producer responsibility regulations in Europe and other parts of the world that will be coming into play in the next couple of years. So regulation is driving a lot of this, because I think a lot of companies are realizing their products are going to have to be more durable, made with eco-design principles, more repairable. So more circular products will be forced by regulations. I think, Ellen MacArthur, we all know, has done a fantastic job to say, actually, the economics is not going to stack up. If you're a business solely reliant on virgin materials, where those costs are going up, the competition for those virgin materials is going up, you're going to be a huge risk. You can't rely on virgin natural materials anymore. You've got to have a mix of recycling as well and secondary materials. And I think the customer, again, reputation-wise, is demanding a more circular approach. So it is regulation. It's the kind of the physical risk of being too dependent on virgin materials. And it's also customers saying, I need to know there's a recycling element in this.
Lots of ways, lots of directions to go in, and opportunities as well as risks there. I just want to bring out, you moved it away from the sort of in-house role into more advisory support role last year, wasn't it, to Salterbaxter? Just talk about that move and the current role a little bit, if you would.
Yeah, Salterbaxter is a fantastic consultancy. We've got a great team, lots of experts. We help companies get compliant with upcoming regulations. We help clients with reporting, disclosure in a compliant way. We're working on the CSRD, which is an imminent regulation, forcing companies to be much better at managing, identifying and disclosing risk. We work on materiality and double materiality. So the idea now is double materiality. You can't just look at your impacts on the world. You're looking at how climate change and other serious challenges impact you as a business, and how do you quantify those risks in a much more detailed way. So we're helping clients with that. We help clients evolve their sustainability strategies. We help clients implement their sustainability strategies, because you've got to mobilize your staff and your heads of departments. And so supporting clients with effective implementation of sustainability strategies is very important. And we work on helping companies communicate their strategies as well. So it's a great team. We do a lot of work in a lot of sectors. And it's been great to go back to consult. I mean, WWF, we were sort of advising companies in a way, in many ways, and to go back to this space of advising various companies in various sectors, I love, because it's a big variety, and it's good.
And I just wanted to bring out, you do a lot of work outside of the sort of professional environment as well, don't you, in terms of that side of it. I'm interested to understand what you think that brings to your professional world and your personal sense of satisfaction.
Yeah, I mean, I work with the British Fashion Council and have done for many years, and that's a different kind of outside role that just keeps, round the table with lots of the fashion brands to say, how does this industry really move more deeply into sustainability and circularity? I'm a trustee at Earthwatch. Earthwatch is a fantastic organisation that is about citizen science, using citizens out there to help collect data and understand what is the impact we're seeing in our rivers right now, and what is everyone's talking about regenerative agriculture and the impact on soils and farming, and using citizen science in that space as well. And they do tiny forests as well, which brings sort of small forests to the urban environment to help sort of people in urban environments understand a bit more about nature and forest. And that's just great, because then the Earthwatch keeps you up to speed with the science of what's going on out there. And again, it just motivates you and makes you excited about how people and citizens can help support science.
Yes. And do you think the two work in tandem, your sort of professional and non sort of extracurricular activities?
Yeah, absolutely. I just try and keep going with working with environmental groups, working on with fashion and thinking about how can it go further forward in circularity, and it mixes well with what I'm doing in the day-to-day consultancy business. Yes. So it's always good to try and be a trustee or keep going with voluntary kind of things, because it just inspires you. And I always try and do talks to students as well. I've worked with the Central St Martin's and other sort of universities to sort of engage with students, because they're the ones who can keep you on track, keep you on your toes. They challenge you. It's almost like a reverse mentoring thing where they can say, you keep up to speed. What are young people thinking about these days? Are they thinking as much about vegetarianism as we think they are, and things like that. And so I always try and engage with students as well, because that also keeps your energy way up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We're sort of coming towards the end, I'm afraid. Could talk for a lot longer, Dax, but we'll try and bring it to a close. I'm asking people what advice they'd give. So for people who are looking to enter the sustainability agenda, or like you, move from one career path into a more sustainable green career, are there any sort of snippets that you'd sort of bring out to say would be good advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, do expect a challenge. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have got lots of incoming candidates with quite a bit of experience, so it is reasonably competitive. Yes. So, but do not lose heart. Treat it as a project. And what I did back then was, I just said to myself, I'm going to pick out the big 10 top NGOs. I'm going to write my letters, and I literally went round London dropping them off into the letterboxes myself. And it was literally going back to that sort of thing. And I think originally I started in communications, and that's not where I wanted to be. So I think being flexible with your organisation, be flexible with the departments, yes, and then you can make your sideways steps into the areas you want to be, and just be persistent and use your experience, amplify the particular experience you've got, think about the parts of sustainability you want to specialise in and focus on, yes, and just keep at it. And I would always recommend an NGO, because it gives you that rounded view of the world, and then you can go into business if that's your desire, but just be persistent.
and flexible and look for those opportunities.
Exactly,
Fantastic.
exactly.
Thank you, Dax. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope you found that as interesting as I have. Really appreciate your time and insights there, Dax. And thank you all.